At 2:38 in the afternoon on May 9, 1943, Obergefreiter Hans Weber stepped off a troop train at a dusty rail siding outside Hearne, Texas, and saw what looked like a small American town rising from the cotton fields. Watchtowers, yes. Barbed wire, yes. But also fountains, gardens, and what appeared to be a swimming pool under construction. Weber was 23 years old, captured 3 weeks earlier in Tunisia when his artillery position was overrun by American tanks. He had spent the voyage from North Africa expecting the worst. German propaganda had told him Americans tortured prisoners, that he would be worked to death in labor camps, that he might not survive the war. The other 247 men on the train shared his fear. They had seen what happened to Soviet prisoners in German camps. They assumed Americans would return the favor. What Weber didn't know was that within 6 months, he would gain 31 pounds, learn conversational English from university professors, and perform in a theatrical production of Goethe's Faust wearing a handmade costume complete with wig and stage makeup. What he couldn't have imagined was that local Texans would visit the camp not to mock the enemy, but to attend concerts performed by captured members of the Leipzig Symphony Orchestra. And what would have seemed impossible was that by 1945, German prisoners would be eating better than German soldiers still fighting on the Eastern Front, better than German civilians back home, and better than many American families living under wartime rationing. The guards called it Camp Hearne. The prisoners would call it something else entirely. Weber had been a conscript, drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1941 at age 19. He had served in North Africa for 14 months before capture. Artillery crew, 88mm guns. He had never been to America. He had never been outside Germany before the war. His hometown was Minden, a small city in North Rhine-Westphalia. Population 43,000. His father worked in a textile mill. Weber had been studying to become a machinist when conscription papers arrived. The train stopped at the camp entrance at 3:12 in the afternoon. American soldiers with rifles ordered the prisoners to form up in ranks. Weber's German was good enough that he understood most of the shouted commands. The Americans were professional, not cruel. No beatings, no insults. Just orders. The prisoners marched through the main gate into what the Americans called Compound 1. The compound covered roughly 20 acres. Rows of wooden barracks stretched in neat lines. Weber counted 24 buildings. Each barrack would hold approximately 60 men. The math told him this compound alone could house over 1,400 prisoners. An American captain gave a speech through an interpreter. The rules were simple. No escape attempts. No violence. Work details would be voluntary for enlisted men, mandatory for no one. Officers and NCOs would not be required to work under Geneva Convention protocols. Prisoners who worked would earn 10 cents per hour in canteen coupons. The canteen sold cigarettes, toiletries, writing materials, and other items. 3 meals per day would be provided. Medical care would be provided. Religious services would be held on Sundays. Mail would be allowed, 1 letter per week, subject to censorship. Weber listened and tried to understand the angle. The Americans were being too reasonable. There had to be a catch. His friend Dieter Hoffmann, a corporal from Hamburg, whispered the same thought. This was propaganda, a show for Red Cross inspectors. Once the inspectors left, conditions would deteriorate. The first meal proved Weber wrong. Dinner was served at 6:30 that evening. The prisoners lined up outside a mess hall and filed through with metal trays. American cooks served the food. Weber received a portion of roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans, 2 slices of white bread, an apple, and coffee. The portion was larger than anything he had eaten in 6 months. Weber sat at a long wooden table with Hoffmann and 4 other men from their artillery unit. They ate in silence, waiting for someone to take the food away or announce this was a mistake meant for American soldiers. No one took the food. No one made announcements. The Americans simply served seconds to anyone who wanted more. Hoffman said the beef was overcooked. Weber agreed, but he ate every bite anyway. The potatoes were bland, missing salt or butter. The bread was soft, almost cake-like, nothing like the dense rye bread from home, but the quantity was undeniable. Weber estimated he had consumed at least 2,500 calories in one meal. In Tunisia, his daily ration had been 1,600 calories, and that was before supply lines started failing. After dinner, the prisoners were assigned to barracks. Weber was placed in Barrack 7, with the 63 other enlisted men. Each man received a cot, 2 wool blankets, a pillow, a footlocker, and a small shelf. The barracks had electric lights, something Weber had not seen since leaving Germany. There were flush toilets in a separate latrine building. Hot showers, 5 minutes per man, once per day. Weber lay on his cot that first night and tried to make sense of what was happening. The food was real. The beds were real. The Americans were not starving them or beating them or working them to death. Hoffman, on the adjacent cot, suggested the Americans needed healthy prisoners for propaganda photographs. Weber did not have a better explanation. By the end of May, Weber had gained 7 pounds. The camp routine had settled into predictability. Breakfast at 700, lunch at noon, dinner at 1800. 3 meals, each providing roughly 1,000 calories. The food was consistent: meat, potatoes or rice, vegetables, bread, fruit, coffee. Sometimes the meat was pork, sometimes chicken. Twice they received fish. The variety was better than what Weber had eaten as a soldier in Africa. Work details began in early June. The camp needed labor for local farms: cotton, onions, peanuts. The farmers were desperate. Most young American men had gone to war. The farms needed hands. The military needed to keep prisoners occupied. Weber volunteered. 10 cents per hour sounded better than sitting in the compound all day. The work was hard but not cruel. Weber was assigned to a cotton farm 8 miles from camp. He worked 8 hours per day, 5 days per week. The farmer, a man named Patterson, was 62 years old and missing his left hand from a farming accident in 1927. Patterson treated the German prisoners like hired help, not enemies. He showed them how to work the rows efficiently. He provided water and shade breaks. At noon, he provided lunch, sandwiches, fruit, lemonade. Patterson's wife sometimes came to the fields with fresh baked bread. She spoke no German. Weber spoke minimal English. But she smiled when handing out food, and Weber understood kindness in any language. By July, Weber had earned enough canteen coupons to buy cigarettes and writing paper. He wrote his first letter home on July 18th. He told his mother he was safe, well-fed, and working on a farm. He did not mention the quantities of food or the treatment because he assumed censors would delete those details as propaganda. The letter reached Minden 3 months later. His mother's reply arrived in November. She told him food in Germany was scarce. The family was living on ration cards: 250 grams of meat per week, 2,000 calories per day, if they were lucky. She asked if he could send food packages. Weber read the letter twice and did not know how to respond. He was eating better as a prisoner in Texas than his family was eating as civilians in Germany. The irony was not lost on him. The camp expanded through the summer. New compounds opened to house additional prisoners. By August, Camp Hearne held over 4,800 German POWs. The population required infrastructure. The Americans built recreation facilities, soccer fields, volleyball courts, a track. They provided materials for prisoners to build additional amenities. Weber watched as fellow prisoners constructed elaborate fountains using concrete and scrap metal. The fountains were decorative, non-functional art projects that served no practical purpose beyond morale. One prisoner, a stonemason named Klaus Reinhardt, built a waist-high replica of Heidelberg Castle, complete with detailed turrets and a working moat fed by rainwater. The construction took him 6 weeks. American guards stopped to admire the work. Local Texas residents asked permission to photograph it. Weber could not reconcile this reality with what he had been told about Americans. The propaganda had described them as barbaric, materialistic, incapable of culture or refinement. Yet here they were providing art supplies, construction materials, and encouragement for German prisoners to build decorative castles in a prison camp. In September, the camp announced educational opportunities. Baylor University, located 90 miles away in Waco, would offer correspondence courses. Mathematics, agriculture, foreign languages, business, history. The courses were free. Credits would be recognized in Germany after the war. Weber enrolled in mechanical engineering. He had been studying to become a machinist before conscription. Now he could continue that education while imprisoned. The first course materials arrived on September 23rd. Textbooks, assignment sheets, examination schedules. Weber spent his evenings after work studying mathematics and technical drawing. The barracks had electric lights until 2200 hours. Weber worked at a small desk he had built from scrap. Lumber. Hoffman, who had enrolled in English language courses, studied at the adjacent desk. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on either man. They were enemy soldiers, captured in combat, now attending university courses provided by the nation they had been trying to kill 6 months earlier. October brought entertainment. The camp formed theatrical groups. Weber had no interest in acting, but Hoffman joined a production of Schiller's Wilhelm Tell. The production required costumes, sets, props. The Americans provided fabric, paint, lumber. Prisoners with tailoring skills made period costumes. Others built elaborate stage sets with painted backdrops depicting Swiss mountains. The performance took place on October 29th in the newly completed theater in Compound 3. The theater seated 400 people. It had an orchestra pit, stadium seating, and a proper stage with curtains. Weber attended and watched Hoffman perform in a 3-hour production that would have been acceptable in any German city theater. The audience was entirely German prisoners. The applause was genuine. After the performance, Hoffman explained that the theater group had received permission to perform for local Texans. The Americans wanted to show their citizens that German prisoners were being treated humanely. The next performance would be open to the public. Weber struggled with this. He was grateful for the treatment, grateful for the food and education and safety. But he was also a soldier of the Wehrmacht. His nation was at war with America. Men were dying in Europe and the Pacific. And he was performing in theater productions for Texas farmers. The guilt was complicated. By November, Weber had gained 22 pounds since arrival. His uniform no longer fit properly. The camp quartermaster issued new clothing: American work shirts, trousers, boots. The prisoners were allowed to keep their German uniforms for formal occasions, but day-to-day wear was American military surplus with PW stenciled on the back. The food continued to be abundant. Weber calculated his daily intake at approximately 3,200 calories. For comparison, his mother's last letter mentioned the family was struggling to reach 1,800 calories per day. German soldiers on the Eastern Front were receiving even less. Weber was eating better as a prisoner than as a soldier, better than civilians, better than men still fighting. The camp canteen became a social center. Weber spent his evenings there drinking beer purchased with work coupons. The beer was American, weak compared to German lager, but available. Enlisted prisoners received beer coupons. Officers received wine coupons. The distinction was maintained even in captivity. In December, the camp orchestra performed its first public concert. The orchestra included professional musicians captured in Tunisia, members of military bands who had been performing for German troops before capture. The conductor was Willy Matz, former director of the Leipzig Symphony Orchestra. Matz had been conscripted in 1942 and assigned to a military entertainment unit. He was captured in May 1943 and transported to Texas. The concert took place on December 12 in the Compound 3 Theater. The program included Beethoven, Mozart, and Brahms. The orchestra wore white tuxedos provided by the American Red Cross. The audience included German prisoners, American guards, and over 200 local Texas residents who had purchased tickets. Weber attended and watched. Texans applaud German music performed by German prisoners. The disconnect was profound. These were the same Texans whose sons and brothers were fighting Germans in Europe. Yet here they sat, enjoying an evening of classical music, treating enemy soldiers like visiting artists. After the concert, Weber overheard American guards discussing the event. One guard said the prisoners were living better than his family back in Oklahoma. Another guard said the camp was too comfortable, that Germans were being rewarded for losing. A third guard said the Geneva Convention required humane treatment and America followed its obligations even when the enemy did not. The conversation illuminated something Weber had been struggling to understand. The Americans were not treating prisoners well out of kindness or sympathy. They were doing it because their laws and treaties required it. They were following rules even when those rules seemed disadvantageous. January 1944 brought snow, unusual for Central Texas, but not impossible. The temperature dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The barracks had wood-burning stoves. Prisoners were issued additional blankets. Work details were suspended during the cold snap. Weber spent 3 days indoors studying engineering textbooks and writing letters. He had completed his first Baylor course with a passing grade. The university sent a certificate recognizing his achievement. Weber kept the certificate in his footlocker alongside letters from home and a photograph of his family taken before the war. Hoffman completed his English course and was now conversationally fluent. He spoke with American guards regularly, asking about their families, their hometowns, their plans after the war. The guards reciprocated, asking about Germany, about life before the war, about what German soldiers thought of Hitler. The conversations were carefully neutral. No one discussed politics directly. But the subtext was clear. Many German prisoners did not support the Nazi government. They had been conscripts, not volunteers. They had fought because refusing meant execution. Now they were relieved to be out of the war, safe, well-fed, and waiting for it to end. February brought news that changed everything. American and British forces were advancing through Italy. Soviet forces were pushing west through Ukraine. The war was turning against Germany. The prisoners at Camp Hearne received news through letters from home and occasional American newspapers that guards left in common areas. Weber read descriptions of bombing raids on German cities: Hamburg, Dresden, Berlin. The scale of destruction was difficult to comprehend. His mother's letters became shorter, more anxious. Food was scarce. Heating fuel was scarce. Allied bombers struck industrial targets during the day, residential areas at night. Weber sat in the Texas sunshine eating fresh beef and vegetables while his family huddled in basements waiting for the all-clear sirens. The guilt intensified. By March, the camp had established gardens where prisoners grew their own food: peanuts, beans, onions, tomatoes. The gardens were optional, recreational projects for prisoners with agricultural interest. Weber helped plant a vegetable patch behind Barrack 7. The soil was good. The growing season was long. By May, they were harvesting fresh vegetables that supplemented the already abundant camp meals. One prisoner complained to an American officer that the camp had run out of chalk for marking the soccer field. The officer suggested using sugar as a substitute. The prisoner was astonished. Sugar was heavily rationed in America and completely unavailable in Germany. Yet the camp had enough surplus sugar that it could be used to mark athletic fields. The officer shrugged and said the Geneva Convention required adequate rations. Sugar was included in adequate rations. April brought more theater productions, more concerts, more educational courses. Weber enrolled in advanced mathematics and continued his engineering studies. He was gaining knowledge that would serve him after the war, assuming he survived to return home. By May 1944, Weber had been imprisoned for 1 year. He had gained 31 pounds. He had completed 2 university courses with passing grades. He had learned conversational English. He had worked on Texas farms and earned enough canteen coupons to buy cigarettes, writing materials, and small luxuries that were unavailable to civilians in either America or Germany. He wrote to his mother describing his situation in careful terms that he hoped would pass the censors. He told her he was safe and healthy. He did not describe the abundance of food or the educational opportunities because those details seemed like propaganda, even though they were true. His mother's reply arrived in August. She thanked God he was safe. She said his younger brother had been conscripted and sent to the Eastern Front. She asked Weber to pray for him. Weber sat in his bunk and tried to process the information. His brother was 18 years old, fighting somewhere in Poland or Russia, facing Soviet tanks and artillery. Meanwhile, Weber was attending university courses in Texas and performing in theater productions. The war had become surreal. In June 1944, news reached the camp that Allied forces had landed in Normandy. D-Day, the invasion of France. German prisoners gathered in common areas discussing what this meant. Some believed Germany could still win if secret weapons were deployed. Others believed the war was effectively over and Germany would surrender within months. Hoffmann said the war would end by Christmas. Weber hoped Hoffmann was right. The camp administration required prisoners to attend film screenings. The films showed combat footage, newsreels, propaganda material. In April 1945, after Germany surrendered, the films changed. The Americans showed footage from liberated concentration camps: Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. The images were difficult to watch. Emaciated prisoners, mass graves, gas chambers. Weber watched and felt physically ill. Many German prisoners refused to believe the footage was real. They claimed it was American propaganda, that such atrocities were impossible. But Weber had seen enough to know the footage was authentic. The scale of horror was too vast, too detailed to be fabricated. He wrote to his mother asking if she had known. Her reply was evasive. Everyone had known something was happening to Jews and political prisoners. No one had known the full extent. Weber realized he had been fighting for a government that committed genocide while he worried about the quality of American coffee and white bread. The guilt became unbearable. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. The prisoners at Camp Hearne received the news the following day. Some prisoners celebrated quietly. Others wept. Most sat in stunned silence trying to comprehend what came next. Weber remained at Camp Hearne until December 1945. Repatriation took months. Tens of thousands of German prisoners were held in American camps across the country. The logistics of returning them to Europe were complicated by destroyed infrastructure and ongoing food shortages in Germany. When Weber finally boarded a ship for the voyage home in late December, he weighed 187 pounds. He had weighed 156 pounds when captured. He carried with him 2 university certificates from Baylor, a footlocker of personal belongings, and a profound confusion about what he had experienced. The voyage took 2 weeks. The ship docked in Bremen on January 14, 1946. Weber stepped onto German soil for the first time in 3 years and saw a country he did not recognize. Cities were rubble. People were thin, wearing ragged clothing, searching for food. His family home in Minden had survived the bombing, but the textile mill where his father worked was destroyed. His mother cried when she saw him. She said he looked healthy, well-fed, strong. She said his younger brother had been killed near Warsaw in January 1945. Soviet offensive. His body was never recovered. Weber tried to explain where he had been, what he had experienced. His mother did not understand how Americans could treat enemy soldiers better than Germany treated its own citizens. She asked if it was propaganda, if he had been brainwashed. Weber said it was not propaganda. The food was real. The education was real. The treatment was real. His mother asked why. Weber said the Americans followed rules. They had laws and treaties, and they followed them even when it was inconvenient, even when their own people were suffering, even when the enemy would not reciprocate. His mother did not understand. Weber was not sure he understood either. He used his university credits to enroll at Technical University of Braunschweig in 1947. He completed his degree in mechanical engineering in 1950. He worked for Volkswagen for 32 years. He married, had 3 children, retired in 1982. He never spoke about Camp Hearne except to his wife, once in 1963. She asked about his war experience. He told her he had been captured in Tunisia and spent 2 years in Texas. She asked what it was like. He said it was better than being free in Germany. She did not understand. Weber died in 1997 at age 77. Among his possessions were 2 certificates from Baylor University, dated 1944 and 1945. His children found them while sorting through his effects. They asked their mother what the certificates meant. She said their father had earned university credits while imprisoned in America. The children did not understand how that was possible. The ruins of Camp Hearne still exist outside Hearne, Texas. The barracks are gone. The theaters are gone. But some of the fountains remain, crumbling concrete structures built by German prisoners 80 years ago. Flowers still grow there, descendants of irises and lilies planted by men who were supposed to be enemies, but were treated like students, artists, and human beings deserving of dignity, even in captivity. Local historians call it the Fritz Ritz, the camp where German prisoners lived better than American civilians, where enemy soldiers attended university and performed operas and built decorative fountains because the Geneva Convention required humane treatment, and America followed its obligations even when its own people were suffering under rationing and wartime sacrifice. The story remains uncomfortable because it contradicts simple narratives about war and enemies and justice. But the certificates are real. The fountains are real. The weight gain was real. Hans Weber gained 31 pounds while imprisoned in Texas because Americans fed their enemies the same rations they fed their own soldiers. Not out of kindness, but because their laws required it, and they followed their laws even when it seemed absurd. That is what separated them from the government Weber had been fighting for. That is what made the difference.